I was betrothed to Prince Kyle even before we left, thanks to an agreement between our two families. However, that arrangement was abruptly broken in the middle of a lavish party, when Kyle called off the engagement because she said she was tired of me and wanted to be with Terenezza. I was horrified by this betrayal, while the party guests cheered for Kyle and Terenezza when she announced they were getting married. I couldn't understand why everyone would support a scoundrel who had just broken off his engagement. But then I learned the reason. Kyle praised Terenezza as a good and intelligent woman, while I was just cold-hearted. She said that pretending to be happy about being engaged to me for the past 17 years was the greatest torment of her life, and that she was truly happy to finally be free of me. But I'm not one to back down easily. I reminded Kyle that this engagement was arranged by our parents, and that she couldn't break it off herself. Kyle replied that she could break off the engagement without anyone's consent, because I was a petty criminal who had been bothering Terenezza out of jealousy. Terenezza started playing the victim when Kyle recounted how I had bullied her at the academy. I called it a lie, as this was the first time I had met Terenezza in person. We were in different classes. However, Kyle, who was not very smart to begin with, lost all reason after falling for Terenezza. She thought I was trying to invalidate her new engagement by pointing out that I was in an advanced class, while Terenezza was only in a regular class. She said Terenezza had told her all the times I had bullied her, including locking her in the restroom and pushing her down the stairs. She called me a wicked traitor, and I decided I had endured this child enough. I told Kyle I didn't care about those accusations anymore, and I would also accept the annulment of this engagement. However, I asked Kyle for one last thing before we ended this relationship forever. The prince didn't want to give me that, but Terenezza, confident in her victory, told him to listen to this poor woman's request so she wouldn't have any regrets. Kyle began praising her kindness, then asked me what I wanted. I slowly walked towards them and clenched my fist, telling Kyle that my last wish was to punch her in the face. Kyle stood stunned at my words and asked if I had lost my mind. But instead of answering him, I delivered a punch straight to Terenezza's face, with such elegance that even Muhammad Ali would have nodded in admiration. However, behind this single punch lies a long story, and for better or worse, we'll have to watch until the end to see the outcome. Since childhood, I've loved beating people up, and every week I would unleash my fist on some unfortunate soul. My brother, Leonardo, always tried to lecture me about my violent tendencies, but I told him I was doing this for a higher purpose. Even though Leonardo knew this time I had saved a commoner from a nobleman's clutches, he couldn't forget my blood-stained appearance. He said I was about to join aristocratic society at a party, and that I should stop hitting people and act like a young gentleman. That turned out to be the greatest challenge for me, as I met the unbearable Kyle for the first time at that party. He told me that from that day on, I would be his servant, and I had to use all my willpower to suppress the urge to punch him because I knew he was the prince of this country, as well as my future husband. That was just the beginning of my suffering as Kyle continued to bully and prank me, while my hands were tied by family circumstances. Even my father couldn't help, as we were dealing with royalty. Therefore, I had to endure the abuse for many years. Finally, I turned 15 and entered the National Academy with the highest score, quickly gaining many admirers. Unfortunately, Kyle was also there, and he publicly declared that I would serve him like a slave, even within the academy. However, by this time, I had become immune to his pranks and his arrogance, so I maintained a cold demeanor when dealing with him. A few days later, Kyle stormed into my classroom in a very bad mood and started yelling, telling me to go buy him lunch. I apologized and told him I would do it right away. But the scoundrel was still not satisfied and took me away to be punished, leaving his henchmen to watch over some other girls so they wouldn't report to the teachers. I soon realized Kyle was angry about being demoted to a lower class due to poor grades, and he wanted to vent his frustration by attacking me. He decided to cut off my hair and bring it back to class as a trophy. And even with my patience, that crossed the line. I told her to stop or I would tell her family. But Kyle insulted my father, calling him a mere hound for the royalty. I was about to smash her face in with a club. But luckily, Prince Julius was nearby, and he immediately intervened to stop the brawl. Kyle couldn't do anything in front of his brother and left after being lectured. I knew she would be back to bother me again, but I was still grateful to Julius for saving me. He replied that he was just saving his little brother, before switching to flirt with me, and I started to respect him for his good character. I knew Prince Julius was the frontrunner for the next king's seat. But the corrupt nobles feared him, and they were supporting Kyle to save their own skin. However, my respect for the prince soon turned into jealousy when I discovered Julius had gotten a perfect score on all subjects, ending my streak of top honors. I thought Julius must have been really excellent and diligent, but when he came close and told me how easy it was to get a perfect score, I became enraged. I saw it as a personal mockery and studied very hard to beat him next time. But then the rumor spread that Julius intentionally lost because he wanted to make me happy. This made me even more disappointed, and I decided to completely ignore him. But Julius kept bothering me. He even followed me after class, asking about the situation between me and Kyle. And I suddenly realized that Kyle hasn't had any intention of bothering me lately. Despite suffering that humiliation that day, I realized that Julius was shadowing me, so Kyle would stay away, and I started to look at him in a more positive light. Then Julius suddenly started flirting with me, and I would have fallen for him if he hadn't called me an interesting specimen. I was shocked by his remark, but it turned out Julius wasn't lying. He truly thought I was an interesting specimen worth studying, and even took notes on me. That's when I started to hate Julius and wished I could take him down along with Kyle someday. Back to the present. All my pent-up frustration finally found an outlet in the form of Terenezza's face. With just one punch, I sent her flying and knocked down 2 more with a single sweep. Kyle panicked and asked me what the heck I was doing. I coldly replied that I was annoyed by her venomous words and Terenezza had to pay for it. After that, I walked towards the group of nobles who were groveling, fully aware that each and every one of them was a corrupt scoundrel. I was furious at them for celebrating Kyle's broken engagement, so I donned the thick gloves I always keep on hand in case of emergencies. The nobles panicked and called the guards, but I quickly used magic to put them to sleep before systematically taking down each noble one by one. The nobles began begging for anyone to protect them, even offering to trade their servitude, though the slave trade was illegal in the country. I realized that these people were useless trash that couldn't be recycled, and there would be no burden on my conscience if I knocked them all unconscious. Therefore, I activated my special time magic to increase my speed and began my sweep with fist-rated E for all involved. Before long, all the nobles were lying incapacitated on the floor. Kyle was the last one remaining, and he wet himself after seeing my true form. I told him that it was his turn now, and just as I was about to punch him, my brother Leonardo arrived to stop me. However, he was too late, and I sent Kyle flying into the wall. It felt so refreshing. While Leonardo was horrified to see the nobles lying incapacitated on the ground, Julius seemed highly amused. I was almost tempted to slap him too, but I decided not to go that far for now. I went to greet Julius and Leonardo, and they asked me the reason for my violent outburst. At first, I spoke like a bot, saying that they had committed unforgivable sins and then boasted about them, so I punished them on the spot. But when Julius asked me for the exact details, I replied that they had made me furious, so I took them down. Leonardo cried out in pain upon hearing this, but Julius began to laugh, saying he wished someone had invented the camera because he really wanted to see how I defeated all the nobles. He told me to wait for him to arrive so we could start the battle, but I told him that was an absurd request. Meanwhile, my brother began to panic, thinking about the consequences, but Julius reassured him that he would handle things here. I suddenly felt dizzy and fell to the ground. Julius caught my head just before it hit the floor. I woke up after 3 days, hearing bells ringing in my head. As I slowly regained consciousness, I realized I had used too much power that Krenoa, the god of time, had granted me. However, as soon as I opened my eyes, I saw a maid hovering over me, pointing a knife at me. I calmly asked the maid, "Who are you?" But she screamed at me to die and tried to stab me. However, she could not match my reaction speed and was immediately slammed into the wall. Leonardo rushed in upon hearing the loud noise from his sister's room and was horrified to discover that the first thing I did after waking up was punch someone. Regardless, he told me how worried he was about me, and then Julius entered the room after I had showered and cleaned myself up. Julius announced that my engagement to Kyle had been officially called off with the permission of both families. Kyle was stripped of his royal inheritance for shielding nobles involved in the slave trade, and all the nobles at the party were also arrested. I was satisfied to hear this and asked Julius if I would be punished. He said I was too important to the royal family to be punished, but until this matter cooled down, I would have a hard time finding a man willing to marry me. However, he also had good news for me. Julius told me that my recent actions had become a famous story throughout the kingdom, and everyone was talking about me as if I were Batman. They called me the Blood Queen, the one who sent a bunch of evil nobles to prison with just her fists, and I was like a hero to all of them. Leo flinched upon hearing yet another fearsome nickname for his sister, but Julius told him there were more important things to resolve first. Among the nobles arrested were many prominent figures holding positions in the government, but their biggest challenge was the Prime Minister, Kyle's biggest supporter. Julius said the king had also suspected Kyle's faction of corruption. Therefore, he established an organization called CIO2 to investigate, and Leo is the current head. He then summoned one of their spies, who was the first to infiltrate Kyle's faction and bring back valuable information. That spy turned out to be Sigurd, one of Kyle's henchmen. He immediately apologized to me for treating me so rudely all this time. I replied that he deserved an Oscar for his excellent performance, and Sigurd became even more worried when I said that. Julius allowed me to punch him if I wanted to let go of everything, and I accepted. However, I just patted Sigurd's cheek because he had also saved me many times while working for Kyle. After that, I asked for permission to leave, realizing that I was finally free to do whatever I wanted without being tied down by Kyle anymore. The first thing on my list was to interrogate the maid who tried to assassinate me. In the morning, I arrived at the warehouse where the maid Nanaka was imprisoned, but I found she had already taken off her clothes. Suddenly, a wildcat attacked me, but I knocked it down and realized that the maid was actually a shapeshifter. I told Nanaka to return to human form so we could talk, and it turned out that the maid was actually a young boy. He was determined to kill me at all costs, and I realized it was because of the slave seal on his chest, which made him obey any command from his master. I asked Nanaka if he would be willing to tell me everything about his master if I could free him, and he told me to go ahead and try. I took that as a sign of agreement and immediately knocked him to the ground before using my powers to reverse the slave seal on his chest. In this world, all humans are born with a guardian spirit, but most people never realize which spirit has blessed them. Those who do realize this can use the powers bestowed by their spirits. And I was blessed by Krinoa, the spirit of time, which is why my family is so highly valued. I used Krinoa's power to restore Nanaka's body to its state before he was taken as a slave, but doing so exhausted me. Still, the boy kept his promise and told me that the one who sent him here was Prime Minister Godwin. Godwin's son was one of my victims at the party, and he ordered Nanaka to kill me. But he had been sent here long before to monitor my family. Nanaka told me that Godwin is a determined scoundrel. He sends spies to all noble families to learn their secrets, and then blackmails them into a slave contract so they fall deeper into his trap. Well, that's enough, and I'm ready to go to Godwin's house to give him a piece of my mind. Nanaka told me to stop, because Godwin is always surrounded by guards, but that won't stop me. So the escaped servant told me that I would find a better opportunity to defeat him when we attend a slave auction in half a week. He didn't know the location of the auction, but he promised me that he could help me contact the slave dealer because he was willing to do anything to avenge the person who enslaved him and many others of his kind. I was happy to accept his help and took him with me, not knowing that Julius had heard my entire plan. The next day, Nanaka and I went to the slums to find the slave dealer, and I told him about a piece of metal I bought from a child for a gold coin. Nanaka told me I was being deceived, but I didn't believe him. Then I turned to Julius, who had come along with us uninvited. At first, he said he wanted to learn more about his people because it would help him become a better king. But when I pressed him, he admitted he had overheard our conversation and realized he couldn't miss this exciting opportunity to see some captured villains. Just then, a group of thugs appeared, and I became excited at the prospect of having someone to fight. However, Nanaka told me to hold my aggressive spirit, as he could talk his way out of this. He approached the thugs and offered to pay them if they took us to a dealer named Junk, but they refused to deal with people as weak-looking as us. They mentioned how a child told them a foolish rich woman bought a stone from him for a gold coin, and they decided to exploit this. They also beat the child and took the child's gold coin on the way to prove that the strong prey on the weak. Hearing this made me furious, and I decided these guys deserved a beating and to increase my strength before I used it to speed up. I quickly disarmed 3 of the thugs, and then showed my dominance over the other 2, who realized they were up against a notoriously violent princess. Still, I disarmed the annoying one and then turned to the last punk, the one who said the strong prey on the weak. I said that by his logic, I could do whatever I wanted to him, and he pleaded for mercy, promising to return the money to the child. I told him he could do that after being beaten, but the thug immediately used the slave dealer's location as a bargaining chip. However, he foolishly revealed the location immediately, and I thanked him before disarming him. Then, I turned back to see Julius clapping in admiration and asked him what he did while I was fighting. He asked if he should have intervened, and I immediately refused. Then Julius decided to talk to the slave dealer Junk himself, for fear that he might recognize Nanaka, or that I might knock him out before getting any information. He managed to do that in a few minutes by flattering and intimidating him, and found the location of the next slave auction. On the way back, I called Julius a potential traitor, and he replied that it was still better than being a violent lunatic. Nanaka wondered if this was the kind of fated encounter he had heard so much about. But then Julius and I suddenly had the same idea and asked him about his idea for infiltrating the auction. Before long, I visited a noble named Zan, who was actually the slave trader Junk had us contact. Zang was delighted to see a new customer before him, but he told me that a young lady should not talk to a scoundrel like Junk just to approach him, while I could ask any noble I knew about his address. I said that it didn't matter anymore, and then asked Zan about his relationship with Junk. Zan said they had no business relationship, and he only hired Junk to bring him any potential slaves that appeared in the red light district. I asked him what he meant, and he replied that mermaids, elves, beastmen, and other kinds of valuable beings. And then he pointed to Nanaka and said that beastman was also a very valuable specimen. When Nanaka became worried upon hearing this, I asked Zan how he knew my follower was a beast man, and he replied that he had enough experience in this field. He started to laugh maniacally, and I was almost tempted to punch him right there. But Nanaka stopped me, saying that we had to follow the plan. Anyway, once the crazy fellow stopped laughing, he asked me what kind of slave I wanted. I told him that I heard there was a slave auction to be held in the capital, and I wanted to attend. Zan became serious upon hearing this, and said that to participate in the auction, I needed to be verified. To do that, I needed to reveal my identity to others in the auction circle, and buy or sell at least 6 slaves. I offered him any amount of money he wanted, but Zan replied that the problem wasn't money. Instead, he said that if I could hand over the beastman slave I had, he would bring me to the auction as a distant relative. I was truly angered by this, but I controlled my anger and smiled politely, saying that if this was all that was needed to enter the auction, I was willing to hand over the slave. Right after, Nanaka and I left the brothel, and I still couldn't believe that slave trading was conducted so openly in the kingdom. I was also glad that everything had gone according to plan, and Zan had acted exactly as Nanaka had predicted. Nanaka was also surprised that I didn't use my fists to solve everything, and I started teasing him for saying that. When we returned home afterwards, I asked Nanaka if he was sure about this, because although I could remove his slave mark later, I couldn't protect him while he was a slave. Nanaka replied that Zan would likely be put up for auction, and he wouldn't let anyone harm his property before the auction. He added that he was doing this to atone for trying to kill me, and then unexpectedly started to yawn. I understood that the pet was mainly active at night and slept during the day. And just then, Nanaka transformed into an animal when he fell asleep soundly in my arms. I took him back to the inn where Prince Julius was waiting for us. I told him that the negotiations were successful, and he was shocked to hear that I was able to resolve the situation without hurting anyone. I was furious with this comment, and then Julius said that he should have accompanied me to witness this rare occasion, where I resolved everything without resorting to violence. But the prince of a country cannot go out and buy slaves. I had no intention of arguing with him, so as soon as I put Nanaka to bed, I decided to go out for some fresh air. Julius said that he was thinking the same thing, and he accompanied me, always staying close to me. I was annoyed by this, but Julius kept following me, saying he had some business on the street. Just then, an apple pie vendor called me over, saying he had a special offer for cute girls. He said that if I bought an apple pie, he would give me a free apple, and Julius decided to take advantage of this offer and bought one too. Next, a jewelry vendor tried to sell me some cheap trinkets, and Julius bought them too, without forgetting to mention them. He also bought from a gloomy fortune teller, and I asked, "Do you really have any business on this street?" Julius replied that he was just making it up, and called me cute for believing such an obvious lie. I was really angry with him and punched a nearby wall because I couldn't hit the prince. Julius just laughed heartily and then gave me an apple pie that made me feel like I was flying to heaven. Julius then apologized for teasing me, but I replied that he couldn't buy my forgiveness with just an apple pie. However, one more apple pie was enough, and I quickly forgave him. Then I noted that Julius was very familiar with the city's layout, and he replied that he often hid to explore the city. He asked me how I felt looking at the market, and I remarked that when Kyle often sent me to buy bread for him, I didn't have much time to look around. However, now that I saw it, the market looked like a fun place. Julius was very happy that I liked it, and said that every time he came here, he wanted me to see this place. I wondered if he would go with me just to take me for a walk, and thought that if he told me directly, I would not be so difficult. Suddenly, Julius started a monologue, saying he hated boredom. Since childhood, the only things that attracted his attention were ugly and crooked things. He was always surrounded by foolish nobles who wanted to please him, and he had to keep acting in front of them. However, he then saw me, who didn't care about him at all. Moreover, he saw his brother bullying me, so he decided to talk to me. He told me that I could report him to his father if Kyle bullied me, but I just gave a strange smile and said he just told a funny story. That was the moment I completely captured his attention, and he never stopped finding me interesting. He once again said that he found almost everything in the world boring, but he hated boredom. That's why he tried to keep interesting things around him, and now no one is more interesting to him than me. Having said that, he suddenly leaned down and kissed my cheek, and I was startled. Julius said this was not a traditional romantic love, but he was confident that he liked me, and I was very valuable to him. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I still couldn't believe what had just happened. I fell onto the bed, wondering if that kiss was just another trick of the prince's to tease me. The next day, I went to see Zan again and told him that I would hand Nanaka over to him, but he had to keep his promise. He agreed, but before that, he asked me for proof that the slave was indeed a mythical beast. I asked him if he believed me, and he replied that it was just his policy to confirm goods before accepting them. I ordered Nanaka to transform, and he immediately turned into a cat, dog, or some other creature. Zan was delighted to see this, and at that moment, a big, scary-looking man with fangs protruding from his lower jaw entered the room. He stared at me and asked Zan if I was the slave they received today. Zan told the slave named Donovan that I was their client, and the mythical beast with me was a slave. Nanakaya was clearly not happy to see him, and I also realized that Donovan was half man and half beast, which made him a lycanthrope. Zan apologized for the rude behavior of his slave and then told him to take the beast away. Donovan seemed annoyed to see it and commented that the mythical beast was known for its rapid regeneration. He put a metal collar around Nanaka's neck and started dragging her, but Nanaka resisted, making him furious. He swung the spiked whip through the air to strike her. But then suddenly, I caught the whip with my bare hands. I told Zan that his slave was quite obedient, and if he didn't have the guts to punish her, I could do it for him. Donovan just scoffed contemptuously. And even Zan looked down on me, telling me not to tease his slave, as he was a former A-class adventurer. He declared I needed to be strong like a knight captain to bring him down. And I asked him if there was a problem with that. He got flustered and said he was just worried about me. But then Donovan declared it was too late. He wouldn't let a woman trample on his pride, and he decided to teach me a lesson. He started to pull the whip from my hand, but he couldn't even pry it from my tight grip. He tried harder, and Zan told him to stop fooling around, as no girl could possibly defeat a much heavier man. Donovan replied that he was trying his best in earnest, and then I asked Zan if Donovan was going to be auctioned off. He replied that he would keep Donovan as a personal knight and trainer for other slaves. And that was good news for me, as I wouldn't have to worry too much about him losing his value after being involved in a fight. And then I suddenly threw Donovan into the air before he crashed into the ceiling. Zan was dumbfounded by this, but I didn't care about him. I turned to Nanaka and removed her collar, seeing that she was bleeding. I used healing magic to cure her wounds and hugged her, saying I would be back to pick her up soon, and in the meantime she should endure the trouble she faced here. I turned to tell the old man about the broken window, and he said I didn't need to pay for the repairs. He even thanked me for teaching Donovan a lesson, as he always failed to do it himself. When I returned to the inn, I saw a familiar car parked outside. My brother got out of it, and he was really angry with me. He said I could tell him the whole story once we reached the capital. And when I saw Julius in the car, I cursed him as a useless prince, who couldn't even stop my brother from finding us. When we reached the capital, Leo started drinking heavily at the tea table, asking both Julius and me if we had any common sense. He asked how we could possibly betray him like that, but Julius replied that they had found the location of the slave auction, so everything was fine. Leo calmed down before saying that he had also researched and found that Prime Minister Godwin was organizing the auction himself. I told him that the auction would take place in another 2 days, and Leo panicked as he began to plan for the big mission. Meanwhile, I started staring intently at Julius. He smiled softly and asked if I wanted to eat apple pie like yesterday. I was angry with him for no reason, but then Leo interrupted us, saying that he already had a plan. First, he wanted me to go home, but I refused, saying that it was the only thing I couldn't do. Leo thought the only reason that drove me was to punch Godwin in the face, but I replied that it was much more than that. I said that since I was young, I had seen good people suffer while cruel villains continued to prosper. I believed that those greedy, wicked scoundrels could not be punished by ordinary means, and that I had to do something to them in my own way. I suddenly stood up and said that selfish and greedy villains were the most satisfying targets to punch. Leo and Julius had their usual reactions to my violent tendencies, and I said that ordinary people can't even beat villains. But because I am the daughter of a high-ranking duke, I will be fine. Julius agreed with me, to Leo's disappointment, who feared that my violent nature would ruin the family's reputation. However, the bigger problem was that someone from the Vanquish Empire might be there at the auction. Both Julius and I were tense when we heard about that, because the Vanquish Empire had been in conflict with our King of Palestine for the past 300 years. They were known to be ruthless, only respecting strength as the ultimate hierarchy, and they were ruled by mighty sorcerers. Although peaceful negotiations had recently begun with both countries, Leo confirmed that the Vanquish Air Force had contacted Godwin recently. Coincidentally, at the same time, Godwin was having a meeting with some officials from the Vanquish Air Force. He was angry with me for ruining Kyle's party and their plans, and ordered his knights to get rid of me. The red-haired knight happily accepted the task and flew away on his dragon. But Godwin was not satisfied with his smug attitude. Just then, a girl told him to forget the sorcerers and see what she had. She pointed a gun at Godwin, but since guns had not been invented in this world, we didn't know what it was. The girl told us it was a gift from the goddess Palmia, and Godwin pulled out his amulet, saying that we already had a gift from her. We didn't think that the funny-looking jar could do anything. But when the girl broke a vase with a gun, he was shocked to the core. The girl was none other than Terenezza, Kyle's girlfriend. And she told Godwin to use this weapon, which could kill even the most fearsome enemies, to win his upcoming battles. But this video ends here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you next time.